So maybe you've been here before. I hope you have. I hope you saw this shop before it burned, because 6 months ago, if you would have pulled up here, it looked like walking into Mordor, right? This beautiful shop was hurt and the tools were devastated. But 6 months have passed. The cleanup, the demolition, the sandblasting, all of that now is in the books, including a reasonable settlement with an insurance company, which was grudgingly rendered. Of course, everybody expects that, but Ken and Elena just pushed through and they got satisfaction. Let me just give you a teaser on that. There was $125,000 worth of tools settled on. Now, there may have been more, but they figured that was close enough. Come on in. You'll get a look at how a restoration company has left this thing ready to put back together. So as we walk inside, there's a couple things I want to point out, because maybe this is the first time on the Jordan property, but this is the quintessential example of green and green architecture in the Pacific Northwest. And green and green architecture is perhaps most notable for its use of a Japanese style of joinery on beams. Powerful wood joinery on the outside and on the inside. Problem was, the wood joinery out here got burned. And so they used dry ice and they sandblasted to remove the char, raise the grain, to see if some of these systems can be saved with blurred lines, but with a perpetual reminder of the story, or whether or not they've got to come down and come back new. The jury is still out on that. But look at what Ken did to facilitate the shingle siding. 3/4-inch CDX plywood sheeting over the whole world, 16-inch studs, lots of blocking. But the cedar siding, the cedar shingle, it's not cedar sidewall shingles, it's just cedar shingles. All right, there is a difference. This gives good backing anywhere. You can run a 6-penny galvanized box nail or a siding nail anywhere on here and get good backing. Look at how he flushed that up. He was hurrying, but he wasn't hurrying so much that he didn't do great work. That's Ken Jordan. So I'm going to bounce through here quickly. We'll show you some of the B-roll of what it was like before, what it was like in the fire, but now that the main part of the heavy lifting is done, here's what survived and here's what didn't. First thing structurally that didn't survive, that has yet to be replaced, is this beautiful post and I'll say lintel or corbel brace assembly. It was sort of a down payment on what Kenny was going to do in his house for the green and green accomplishment. Got to be replaced. And this beam over the top of this is a glue lam. It was probably 9 7/8 by 3.5. This is about a 30-foot span. Too deeply charred. Got to be replaced. Not a huge deal. The restoration company, True North Restoration, did I mention that? Elena told me to mention that because she loves those guys. They did great. They were concerned about this big intermediate beam. It's not the ridge, but it's carrying, 3/4 of the weight of this whole roof. And that is a 19 by 7.25. They were concerned about its integrity, and with the charring, they thought it needed to be replaced. Ken says, no, it doesn't. That's crazy. So we got him in contact with a structural engineer who looked it over, measured it up, and said, you know what, Kenny's right. There's so much Doug fir in the middle of that you could park a but you could put a load on there and it's fine. That beam survived. This beam can be replaced. The walls were all sheeted with cedar, smoked, charred, but the framing members are good. Under this visqueen is his beautiful Ken Jordan shaker-style workbench. I managed to build one quite a bit like it. I just love this thing. Smoke damage, surface char, but Kenny's going to sand all that off and bring it back just like new, we hope. I think you can safely bet on Ken Jordan. Over on this side, let me just point out, first of all, this sealer is Kills primer. Kills is, I believe, a shellac-based primer. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. And it is compatible with the insulation on Romex. It doesn't degrade the wiring. There are some paints and sealers that do degrade the wiring, so you got to make sure you get that right. Look at this scarf joint. I've tried to point it out before in earlier videos, but it was so dusty I don't think you could see it. But that's just an example of the detail that existed and will exist and does exist in this shop and in the house. So let me point out a couple of things. a big line item on the rebuild is the electrical, because the electrical is extensive. Caleb Otis of Otis Electric is here right now talking through with Kenny what has to be torn out and what can be reused. But this is an example. I mean, this panel got hot. And there are various places in this corner of the building where it's just wrecked. And a lot of the building, it's just fine. So this is an opportunity to do a cost-benefit analysis between the additional labor of figuring out what is going to work and what has to go versus the total loss approach of tearing the world out and putting the world back. I think they've got the right man on the job for that calculation. The whole question of how does insurance work? So their learning curve was vertical. They were, since they are good-hearted people, just a little naive to the tricks that exist in the insurance business. One of the first heartaches was that the first restoration company that showed up said they were going to do an appraisal on the tools, on the contents, and didn't. They didn't. And so they were left with just the photographs that were taken, which were adequate. The restoration company was changed out. True North showed up. They did a beautiful job. But the insurance settlement itself was adequate on the structure and woefully inadequate on the contents to begin with, until after some arm wrestling, the insurance company finally turned it over to a major claims adjuster, whatever that means. Somebody who had an idea of the value and the scope and the irreplaceability and all of that. But I am relieved to be able to stand before you and tell you that at this point, the Jordans are content with the money that they've received, and they're hopeful that they will in fact have been made whole or close to it. So, long story short, the settlement on the structure came soon. The settlement on the tools came slow. They were sent 50% of a $45,000 projected loss on the tools. They got the check. They got good advice from their son who said, don't cash it. That's not even close. So from a starting point of 45 to a settled and negotiated and adequate number of, I think, 125,000 on the tools. Now, clearly, you can't replace the emotional impact of losing some of the tools that he had sweat, blood, and tears over to restore from an old and collectible condition to a gorgeous condition. I mean, quantify that if you can. But anyhow, they are in a position now to move forward. So this side of the building didn't get that hot. The main fire was over there, centered in his smaller workbench. It got hot up against the ceiling in there because, heat goes up. This was a bathroom, and that was another adjoining room, the sanctum sanctorum, full of all of the axes and steam whistles and, all kinds of treasures. But the plumbing is fine, except that it's CPVC. And I said, Kenny, you going to replace that? No, he's just going to repair right here. I came in and cut this out the day after the fire so that the leak could be capped off. So it just basically spliced this back in, plumb in new sink, have to build or install a new vanity. He's going to be reasonable about that. He just wants something that's going to work, because what he needs is a shop. Oh, and by the way, let me just mention this now, that it's going to be very interesting to see if this is done soon enough, well enough, that Kenny can make something for the Essential Craftsman build-off out of this shop that in so many ways inspired the whole notion of an Essential Craftsman build-off. Okay, so just to wrap this up, because, how much heartache can you stand, right? But how many wood shops have a beautiful 3 1/4 inch oak floor? 3 1/4, probably. There's a piece of it. Over to here, it was wrecked. There was a hole burned down almost to the subfloor under the old bench over there. But from here on over, it can be sanded and replaced, and the new shop will be glorious. But the glorious aspect of this is that Ken and Elena are not defeated by the hardship. This reminds me of Kelly's grandparents. Their house burned when they were in their 80s, and they were not defeated by the hardship. We choose not what happens to us, but whether or not we're defeated. So I have no doubt that 6 months or 8 months or some period of time from now, there's going to be a shop in here with new tools, and Ken will be in here recreating or creating things that you can't find anywhere else. Got to admire that. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman. Keep up the good work.